Hello everyone, my name is Francisco Lhano and welcome to the second edition of Connected, the podcast of Nova Economics Club. This podcast is done in a partnership with Fidelidade Studio. We would like to thank Fidelidade for giving us access to the studio and its equipment. Today we are here to discuss unconditional basic income. So what is unconditional basic income? Basically, it's a philosopher theory that states that each individual should have an amount of income regardless of its circumstances in terms of is he employed or unemployed. The state should provide him an unconditional income for every month. But let's go a bit further above this, and we have with us Professor Susana Peralta to help us. Professor Susana Peralta is an associate professor at Nova SBE, an investigator in areas like public economics and political economy. Professor, welcome.
Thank you very much, Francisco. It's a big pleasure to be here with you today.
Okay, thank you, Professor. So, first question. A paper using the neoclassical labor supply model stated that unconditional basic income would decrease the participation rate in the labor market. Furthermore, it compares the incentives that different employees have to increase their labor supply, depending on their consumption preferences, and concluded that a basic income would not only reduce unemployment, but also expand the magnitude of employment. However, there is general idea that UBI would reduce the labor supply, since the incentives to work could be eliminated. Are the incentives to work increased or diminished due to the existence of UBI?
It's a very challenging question, and the answer is I have no idea, because no one actually does. I mean, it's such a big shift in terms of the paradigm of the way that the state, of the relationship between our income, our labor supply, and also the welfare state, that it is, I mean, quite honestly, it's almost impossible to predict what would be the impact. But of course, what we have is like partial pieces of evidence that we can put together and that can explain that type of conclusion. Although I have to be honest that I did not read this paper, so I don't know what is the exact mechanism that these authors put in place, that they emphasize, to get their result. But I see at least two very clear avenues that could make the unconditional basic income increase labor supply. One is that people that live on very low incomes, be it because they don't participate in the labor market, or they participate in a very irregular way in the labor market, or even because they do participate in the labor market, but because they have very low wages. That kind of situation actually is very stressing for a number of reasons, and it sort of occupies a lot of mental space in these people's lives, and it is very likely that these people refrain from doing investments in their future, like undergoing some training program or investing in education of other sorts, or even taking the risk of changing jobs to try something that matches better their skills or their preferences or their tastes or their lifestyle or whatever. That in a way, when you are stuck in a situation in which you live with very low resources and under a huge amount of stress to make ends meet, there are many things that you could do to improve it that you just don't do. Whereas an unconditional basic income is a sort of safety network that you can rely on that, and therefore that could likely give you space to actually do all these things that could in the future potentially make our economy better in many ways. And the other reason, of course, which may be the one that is behind the reasoning in that paper, which again I didn't read, is the poverty trap. Okay, so what we know about conditional transfers such as the ones we have today, which these conditional transfers, so they are conditional because they depend on your condition, and they have these means, we call them means tested, because first of all, the welfare state is going to test your means, is going to check that you actually need this transfer, and then if you are poor enough in terms of income, in terms of family composition, and family composition, of course, determines how much income you need to live, in terms of wealth as well, because they are going to check if you own cars, houses, bank accounts, all this stuff. Then you are going to get the transfer, okay? And if you find a job, you lose part of the transfer. And to be honest, all modern welfare states that I know of have this thing which we call in English earnings disregards, whereby if you actually earn some, I mean, if you start a job and you start earning some income, your transfer that you receive from the state does not decrease. So if you get 100 euros more of, as a wage, you do not lose 100 euros from the transfer, because in that respect, of course, you would have zero incentive to work. So no transfer, for instance, the Portuguese one doesn't do it, but no transfer across I would say, the welfare states of rich countries would do that. So in principle, what you have is like, if I have now an income of 100, my transfer is maybe going to decrease 50 euros, so that I still get, before not working, I was getting 100 euros. I mean, if a transfer is 100 euros, just to make, our reasoning simple, I get the transfer without working, which is 100 euros. I now get a job where I get 100 euros. I still keep 50 euros from the transfer. And that means that by going to this job, I increase my income. Okay? So that's partly taken into account by the modern welfare systems. But of course, the disincentive, may potentially still be there. Although, I personally think, it's not and there's research that shows there are many things about these jobs that make them unpleasant, that make people, not wanting to take up the job, which go way beyond
The money.
the income, yes, the wage, whatever, yeah.
Okay. Another topic, one of the main arguments in favor of UBI states that it will allow countries like Portugal to have a stronger middle class families. Now, we discussed poor income families on the last question, now medium class. As it would allow for these families, who usually are financially suffocated in a system like ours, to have some extra income to extra activities like vacations or cultural experience that nowadays we put on second terms, and we put another ones like education and wealth and even food and housing on first priorities. As tourism and culture, the two areas that I mentioned, were two of the most affected areas by the current pandemic that we are still living in. For example, according to Instituto Nacional de Estatística, the hotel nights sold in Portugal decreased by 52% just in September. Do you believe that a system like UBI might be a solution to boost these affected areas of the economy?
Oh, that's an even other question. So I think, first of all, of course, when first of all, it all depends on the level, right? If you have like a ridiculous amount of UBI, then the chances that it will make a difference, particularly in middle income families, are very low. So it really depends on the amount, and also it depends on whether or not you make it taxable income. Because if I get, let's suppose that your universal basic income is 500 euros. Okay, if your marginal tax rate is 35%, which is a reasonable marginal tax rate for a middle income family in Portugal, then you only get 65% of the 500 euros. It would be less, but it's okay. So it's still sizable. So I think that when you look at the material deprivation, so when you look at the Eurostat indicators, and of course I don't have the exact figures in mind, but the Eurostat computes this material deprivation index, which they call deprivation index basically, and where they look at there are some items in that index which are targeting like the most basic needs, like can you afford to eat a meal with proteins, animal or vegetable proteins every second day? Can you buy age appropriate shoes for your kids, age appropriate toys, all this stuff. But then you have stuff which one could consider more of a less basic at least, which is whether or not, for instance, you can afford 1 week of vacation away from your main residence. And the truth is that in Portugal, there are many things which we consider, quite basic. For instance, whether or not you can keep your house reasonably warm in the winter, which are still lacking, even for our middle income families, because, the average wage, the median wage in Portugal will be around 800 euros. This really needs to be studied, and I don't know, but I find it very unlikely that at the current stage of the pandemic, people would use this extra income to go, traveling, even if it's like traveling in Portugal. First of all, because there's the risk, there's the health risk, and then because people are very risk averse, for obvious reasons, like the future seems very dark at this stage, so people would not start spending in stuff like that. If anything, they would either keep the money, which would be good, by the way, because we do need savings, or they would spend it perhaps in more basic stuff for their families. But I'm very skeptical about this, this sort of demand side policies to sort of boost the tourism and hospitality sector, which, by the way, is in a terrible condition. I do think we should definitely get very quickly and very generously at these families with income. But I don't know if a demand-driven policy would be the right answer. I mean, if you really want to put money in the hands of these people, just give them money, right? Give them a transfer. They are, so it's a matter of risk sharing, really. They are bearing disproportionately the risk of these big, gigantic public health problems. So we should just share the risk. We should definitely pay them because they are bearing this cost a lot on their own. So I think that's very unfair. But I don't think that we should do it by making people spend money in these, in these type of activities.
Thank you, Susana. Going now for a more numerical question, let us assume that we want to attribute a basic income equal to the current minimum wage in Portugal to every citizen older than 18 years old. This will lead to an expense to approximately 61 billion euros in social security per year. According to Pordata, our expenditure in social security in 2017 was approximately 16 billion euros, excluding pensions, as we cannot compare pensions to the other social transfers. So firstly, do you believe that a system like UBI would substitute all the existing social benefits, like the unemployment one? And secondly, since the social expenditure will almost be multiplied by 4, if it is sustainable at this value of the minimum wage, and if not, if you have an idea of a value that could be sustainable in our country.
No, I have no idea about the value that could be sustainable. No, I mean, that's a very hard question. I don't think you can. I don't think you can go UBI just overnight. Basically, I think if you want to go UBI, you have to do it gradually. That's what I think, because you want to see what's happening, and of course, you want to begin by the poorest. I mean, probably including the middle classes, by the way. So I think that our welfare system is flawed, and I think that it's flawed in the following way. So it's a statistical thing. It's a statistical problem, okay? It's like when you are giving a social benefit, a transfer to a poor individual, you have this means-testedness. You are going to test many things about this individual because you want to make sure that he really needs the money, okay? And sometimes this even involves like visits from social workers to check if you really live where you live, that you don't have any other income-earning adult living in the same place, but many things that people are subject to, and then the process is very bureaucratic. In Portugal, for instance, the sort of minimum income that you get, you have to renew it every year, so that makes it very costly. People spend a lot of time. Sometimes people don't understand the paperwork. I mean, so the whole system is put in place to make sure that, I mean, not to make sure, because you can never make sure, because it's a problem of asymmetric information, but to sort of minimize the risk that you give money to people that don't need it, okay? And I think that's flawed in many ways, because of the bureaucracy, because of the stigma that it involves, and because, again, it doesn't really give these people the sort of security and time to sort of invest in their future in many different ways. Finding a new job, trying to maybe start their own business, investing in education, whatever. So that's really problematic, and I really think that we need to start shifting the way we think about the welfare state to make it more, okay, if I'm sure that you really don't need it, like if you are Susana Peralta, I look at you, you have like a permanent contract with a public institution, your husband as well, you live in a nice flat, so, I mean, for sure, it's very unlikely that you would need any help from the state. But if I'm doubtful, I'll just give you the money, as opposed to nowadays, which is if I'm doubtful, I'm not giving you the money at all. So I really think that we need to shift. And if you think, going UBI is sort of the limit case of this, where you give to everyone, and then you are sure that you don't leave anyone behind. All the time that you are making decisions at the margin where I'm giving you and I'm not giving you, of course you are bound to make this mistake that someone who may really be in need doesn't get the money, okay? And I think that we are too much on one direction. UBI is sort of the other extreme, And I don't think that you can go from one to the other like overnight. So I really think that you need to start shifting the focus, shifting the sort of this parameter of, in doubt, should I give you or not? I think you should give a lot more, and like make the transfers more permanent, not make these people renew every year with a lot of paperwork, and make it less bureaucratic, and make sure that these people feel, okay, I have something, to fall on if everything else goes wrong in my life. So I don't think that we should go 60 billion overnight. I also think that, of course, if you tax this income, then people that get the income and that have higher under income besides the UBI, then that decreases, but doesn't decrease the cost that much, to be honest, because the average income tax in Portugal would be, I think, around 4% or something, so it wouldn't really change that much, I think. So I really think that we need to go slowly on this. Basically, that's, I think, my main message. And I think, yes, it can replace at least all the transfers that are. So you have two sorts of transfers in the welfare state. I mean, broadly speaking, one is like the unemployment benefit, which depends on your past, working history and how much you have contributed. That is more of an insurance scheme which is tied to your past earnings. So I don't think that one should be replaced totally, because there's an insure. Like if I lose my income, I need to be insured on part of that income which may not be covered by UBI, which is just at the minimum wage level, at least not in the short run. Because again, if you think maybe medium to long run, if the society really gets completely reorganized along these UBI lines, then maybe it would work. But I think that unemployment insurance has to be kept somehow, and it's mostly unemployment insurance really, and then and disability insurance, all these insurance that are tied to your past earnings. But then as pensions, by the way, as you mentioned.
Yeah, of course.
But then you have many transfers which are unlinked to your past earnings, and that, by the way, includes some pensions, and then it includes, these minimum income type of policies, the family allowances, which in Portugal are means tested. They are not means tested in all the countries. So all these, of course, I think they should be replaced behind these, and then there are some savings that you can make. But it's a bold. And I don't think that you can do this, by the way, without going to the revenue side. So I think this goes hand in hand with how, like, higher taxes for the very rich, which I think is something that we are also missing to fund a truly comprehensive and a true, a welfare state that goes in the direction that I just mentioned, which goes a little bit closer to UBI, but not necessarily total UBI. You need more money, and for that you need to get money from the rich, which is something that nowadays we just can't do. I mean, it's just something that we don't have the tools at the level of a country like Portugal. We don't have the tools, and that's really something that we have to do at the European level.
Okay. Another question is regarding to more young people and students. According to Eurostat...
So can I just add something, sorry, before?
Yeah, of course.
There are, there's a bunch of spending by the state which is not included in the social security bill, like housing, which in Portugal, by the way, is never very generous, but housing, subsidized meals at schools. I mean, there are many things that are still means tested that do not go into the social security budget, which potentially, with a decent type of UBI could be saved. So it's likely that you can add a little bit more to the current 16 billion if you add all these other expenses which are de facto means tested and de facto social, but they are not in the budget of the Social Security.
Okay, that's really nice. Thank you. So according to Eurostat, young adults in Portugal leave their parents' house later than the EU average. In Portugal, we live at 29 years old in average, and the EU is 26.2 years. And this value has been increasing over years in Portugal. For example, it was 28.3 in 2016. In 3 years, it increased by 0.7 years. So furthermore, young adults' unemployment is also increasing immensely. For example, since February, 1 in 6 young adults has lost his job. So can a policy like UBI be an effective weapon against these scary numbers and a way to protect young adults financially in order to help them also to achieve their independence earlier from their parents?
For sure, that I'm completely sure about, because that's the thing, is that the welfare state, is designed in all these ways. First of all, it's going to be checking the family composition. If you still live with your parents, then you have, there's adult income in the house. I mean, at least in most houses. So that's a problem. Second problem is like unemployment benefit, disability benefit. They all depend on your previous income stream. And if you don't have a long income stream, or if you just were not able yet to join the formal labor market, then we know that we have a problem of access of the youth to labor markets, formal labor markets, formal and stable contracts and so on. Then the youth are very much they are very much driven away actually from this welfare state that we have, which I said is flawed in many respects, and therefore, yes, anything that goes in the direction of being more of bringing more people, like going UBI. As I said, I'm not sure we should go to the final end line of the UBI, but going close to UBI, and that unlinks the transfer from your previous past contribution history. That is, of course, like super important for the youngsters. And I think I truly believe that there's a societal challenge that we really have to tackle, because I think that our society is leaving the youth behind in many respects, because of the environmental crisis, and because now the pandemic is a big disaster, like education-wise, and the fact that you guys are going to enter the labor market in a time of the biggest crisis that we know of, that's known from past crises to be very, that to actually leave you a scar for the rest of your lives. I don't want to be pessimistic, and of course there are many people that have very successful careers. Like all these things are like on average. So yeah, I really think that we need to do stuff for the youngsters. So I think, of course, tackling the environmental crisis is one top priority, and the other one is definitely giving them means to start their lives. And that is, by the way, one of the channels through which I think you could have positive, but it's just an informed guess, right? But through which you could have potentially positive effects, because young people are more entrepreneurial. Maybe people will have, would take risks, maybe start their own businesses or whatever. Maybe greener business, more sustainable. We have no idea, but it's very likely that we really need to give opportunities to young people. That's something that is really striking me as something which became so obvious in the 2020 pandemic, that if we don't do it now, then I think I'm very skeptical about the future, because the future, of course, is you guys.
Susana, you have mentioned that in case we have a UBI, independent of its value, it should be included in the IRS scale in order for it to be taxed combined with the other formal incomes that people already have. Can you explain a bit what's your idea and how and why should it be done like that?
Again, I like to see it on this line, right, where you have the current, in the limit you have no welfare state at all. That's really the limit, right? And then you are sure that you never give a single euro to anyone, to anyone who doesn't need, because you are not giving to anyone, full stop. And then you have at the other extreme UBI, which is you give to everyone, and therefore, by definition, anyone in need will get the money. And as I say, I think that our welfare state is flawed because it is too close to the. This is a bit too drastic, I think, but I think it's way closer than it should to the situation where you're just not giving enough, okay? Because you have all these checks and balances in place where you really want to make sure that, if you don't need the money, I'm not giving it to you, but the other side of the coin is that you leave out many people that are in need, and you just have to walk the streets, and it's an obvious, you don't need to be very sophisticated social scientists to realize that there are people in need, and that's because the welfare state is not doing its job. Okay, so right. So basically what I said is like, okay, I think we really need to move closer to UBI. I don't think we should go full UBI, overnight. I think we have to move in that direction. And I think that the closer you move to fully UBI, the more making it taxable makes sense. Because again, if you are giving the same amount of money, the same, let's say, 750 euros is roughly the value that you mentioned, to the poorest guy in the country, and to the CEO of a big bank, it makes way more sense if the CEO is paying her marginal tax on this income, which would be a bit closer to 50%, so she would still retain 50%. But so I think that's what makes sense. But if you make your thing of moving closer to UBI just to say include everyone up to the median wage, then I would maybe say, okay, for the time being, make it tax-free and then we'll see. But I think in the limit, if you want to go UBI, keeping the progress, that's a way to keep the system progress. It's like you are doing this thing of checking what people need and what they do not, but once you give, so first of all, I give you the money, and then at the end of the year, I'm going to see how much you earn, and if you earned a lot, you're going to give a little back to me, depending on your marginal tax, and your marginal tax is going to increase with your income, so it makes a lot of sense, and it's more, okay, it's like the government is advancing this money to you, and then perhaps, part of it's going to, if things go well, the money is going to come back, part of it at least, and that makes a lot of sense. But again, I really think that if you want to go UBI or something close to UBI, we need higher taxes. We need to increase the taxes on the rich. And I'm not mentioning personal income tax. You have to think about the overall tax bill, corporate and personal income tax and positive consumption taxes as well, and make sure that the rich are paying their share. And the problem is that with the many ways in which the rich individuals, and particularly the biggest and the most sophisticated firms, they have various ways to optimize. Optimizing tax bills means decreasing tax bill. And I'm not even saying that it's illegal at all, but it means decreasing. And that's a problem because I cannot optimize my tax bill, okay? Like I have a wage and I'm a very lucky, by the way, wage earner. But still I cannot optimize my tax bill. The people that can optimize my tax bill are the really super rich and the ones that have a lot of income from capital. And that's really problematic. That's something that we really need to tackle. That's, you have this book that is now almost 1 year old, which is called Taxing the Rich, How the Rich Dodge Taxes and What We Can Do About It. It's by Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zucman, two economists from the University of Berkeley. And they show that, given all the loopholes in the tax code, having to do with capital income mostly, but also with the tax reform since Reagan that heavily decreased the marginal tax rates at the top in the United States, what you have nowadays is basically a flat tax, where from the poorest individual to the richest millionaire, they all pay around 20 to 23% of their income in taxes, combining state taxes, federal taxes, corporate income taxes, and personal income taxes. And that's really problematic. That's a world trend that is really problematic. So we really need to go back to a situation in which, through international cooperation of some means, we are able to fight these optimizing tax strategies. There's an optimizing tax industry, by the way, out there, and that's really a problem. That these people are destroying social good, and that's something that we should fight with our votes, not with weapons.
Okay, Susana, thank you. This was the second edition of Connected. We hope you've liked it. And Professor, once again, thank you for
it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Francisco. I really like discussing with young economists, promising young economists. I love it.
Thank you. And this was it. I hope you like it and stay connected.